There we go. My name is Darin Eckton. I'm a full-time professor at Utah Valley University. I've been with BYU-Idaho since 2010, teaching mostly COM 150, interpersonal communications, sociology, intro to sociology, and then right now COM 450, which is a conflict negotiation management class. And then I'm an OCR, online course representative, and then I serve as an assistant instructor manager as well. So that's a little bit about who I am. I have 6 kids, 5 alive, 1 in heaven, and I live in Provo, Utah. So that's a little bit about me. Just to get started, this is kind of what we're going to talk about. The common mindset that exists out there that we all kind of deal with but maybe don't quite recognize. Some doctrinal foundation, a process of change that I like to talk about in my class, in all my classes, quite frankly, and what might lead to a mighty change of heart, which is kind of really what we're here at Immortality to learn, is how we can change. Talk about some practical applications and then have some discussion. So that's a lot to cover. I posted everything on here so you can all see it, so you don't always have to click through it. But here's the thing, in K-12 education for our formative years of life, we're taught in many ways what success is and what failure is. It's defined for us. And that's hard to overcome as a teacher. And we're the ones who are defining that for our students, and yet if we put ourselves in the mind of the student, if I'm always being told what success is and what failure is, then how difficult does that make it to invite students to take ownership of their own learning? Because if what I'm supposed to learn as a student is I'm told, just tell me what I need to learn. And as students, we're socialized to learn that way. Just tell me what I need to learn. In fact, that is a common phrase that we hear. Tell me what I need to do to get an A. But we can't. It's a mindset that we've inculcated for their, from age 5 on through high school. And so that's the kind of student we're getting in the classroom. And for those who are coming back to school, our online learners, our adult learners, that's what they're still familiar with because that's been their learning experience. And so it's hard to overcome. That's the reality. That's the mindset. And there's also this idea that there's a fear factor. Failure is such a thing that we fear. It's inbred in us that failure is a bad thing. You can't get an F. And so we fear failure, and when we fear failure, we fear innovation, we fear taking risks, we fear being vulnerable. Because we don't like fear, we don't like that feeling. And so these are some things that we're up against in trying to change the mindset. That this is a mindset that's the reality. Okay? So what I like to say is we must unlearn what we have learned. Okay? To use a Yoda-ism. So here's a question. It's kind of cut off, but it says, are we inviting the students to find out what the Lord would have them learn, do, and become? Are we the ones that are still prescribing what it is that they are to learn? Yeah, there are course outcomes and things like that are important. But are we inviting our students to find out for themselves, to make a transition, to find out what the Lord would have them learn, do, and become? Because they may not be used to that. What's His will? What's His plan for me? And the same goes for us as teachers. So some doctrinal principles I think that are important. Okay? Okay? Here's the thing. Revelation happens in councils. We participate in councils in the church a lot. I asked you the question, do you invite your class to serve as a council? Do you allow it to become a council? And I think sometimes we may not, where revelation can happen as we counsel together. So doctrinally, I will tell you in your mind and in your heart, when we talk about revelation, D&C section 8, verse 2, Elder Bednar, in his book Increase in Learning, he talks about how the difference between gaining knowledge and how that is associated with the mind, and understanding and how it's associated with our hearts. And I think we know a lot of things as teachers, but I think even our students, they know a lot of things in our minds, but it doesn't mean we do them. So for example, I give this example a lot. How many of you know that you need to eat green leafy vegetables? And yet how often do we do it? How often do we know that we need to exercise regularly? We know it in our minds, but how often have we demonstrated understanding and actually living that? And in Elder Bednar's talk from 2010, I think it's like April, Converted unto the Lord, talks about the difference between testimony and conversion. We all know the Sunday school answers. I know that it's important to fast. But do I do it? And do I give a regular fast off? I know that it's important to fill in the blank. And our students commonly give a very theoretical answer. It's important to do fill in the blank of whatever you're teaching. But how often do we actually personalize and apply personally or become converted to the principle? And so we need to get things, move things from our mind into our heart, or as teachers, create the conditions for the principles to not only go from their minds, but to their hearts. We can stuff them full of knowledge, but isn't leading to understanding. Okay? Here's another principle that's related, 2 Nephi 33, 1 and 2. So the Spirit takes truth unto the heart, but we also learn in verse 2 that, and some did, they hardened their hearts. Layman and Lemuel were past feeling. So ours is an opportunity to really create conditions for people to open their hearts. One of the things as you opened your hearts to each other at the beginning, that was the purpose. Because we tend to go into a class, even in online, but especially in face-to-face, we have our walls up. And if our hearts are closed to each other, then how are we going to be able to teach one another? That's part of the BYU teaching model. And this is the doctrine for it. How can we help our students open their hearts to one another so that the Spirit can enter their hearts and be the real teacher? Okay, and so Mosiah, King Benjamin, was a great example of a great teacher. He created the conditions for his people so that the Spirit became their teacher. And they experienced that mighty change in their hearts. Okay. Section 88, verse 122. I was in a training with Elder Bednar in November of last year. And he said, well, we know that the teacher is the Spirit. A lot of times we think we're the teacher when we're appointed, but it's really the Spirit. And you know, that let all have an opportunity to teach one another. And one thing about teaching, he also said a very powerful statement. He said, it's very difficult to discern when we're the ones doing all the talking. Which it's hard for me in a 30-minute period to not violate that principle right now. But I also put this, we talk a lot about pedagogy, that word pedagogy. How many of you have heard the word andragogy? It's an idea of teaching adult learners and how adult learners learn. And if we're really honest with ourselves, we don't like being told what to do or think as adults. A lot of kids don't either. So why do we do that to our students? How do we create the conditions for them to open their hearts, to learn for themselves so that the Spirit can teach? And again, if we can teach one another, that's what this verse is all about. Okay? So, section 107. You'll see this word let up in this verse as well in verse 122. Let every man learn his duty and act in the office in which he's appointed. Well, our students, that's kind of their office, so to speak, but we're also in an office as an assigned teacher. But we need to let this happen. You know, you look at the word let here, let all listen. We need to let it happen. I think sometimes we try to force learning. But if we can remember that the Spirit is the teacher and our opportunity is to create the conditions for people to open their hearts so that the Spirit will enter into their hearts to teach, that's important. And then if we want to be edified and rejoice together, that's going to require opening of hearts. He who preacheth and he who receiveth are edified and rejoice together. So those are some of the doctrinal foundations. But really it's about where our hearts are as teachers and learners. Okay, so here's a process of change. A lot of times when we focus on if we really want to change, we talk about changing and our students changing and becoming disciples, disciple leaders. If we really want to change behavior, how would you define behavior? If you were to give a definition for behavior, how would you define behavior? I'm not looking for any particular answers. Yes, and is it in one situation? In any situation, okay. Would it be safe to say that it's action over time because it's a behavior? It's become something?
Yeah, it's a repeated action.
Okay. Okay, so if you've got repeated actions lead to behavior. You could also say habits. Okay. What leads to action? What causes us to act? Okay.
Fear.
So fear, could we say that's an emotion? Okay. So thoughts, feelings. Okay. So here's the model. If we really want to change behavior, a lot of times we address behavior. So if this behavior of taking ownership of learning, we try to address the behavior. We're going to talk about the behavior of taking ownership of learning, but that doesn't mean it's going to change. I can be ticked off that the dishes are sitting in the sink and go wash them, but wash them and clank things around to let everyone know that I'm ticked off that the dishes are in the sink and they're dirty. Where's my heart? It doesn't change my behavior. The behavior of washing the dishes is a great thing, that act. But it doesn't change my behavior because my heart hasn't changed. Okay, so the focus is really right here. If we want to help our students change anything, if we want to change, the focus has to be getting people to think about, again, it goes back to our mind and our heart. Knowledge, mind, understanding, heart. Okay, so if we really want to help our students change and invite them to take ownership, we need to invite them to think about their thinking and their learning. So here are some practical applications. Okay. The principles that I taught, I like to teach and reinforce these principles kind of throughout. In my instructor profile, I introduce these principles in notes from Brother Eckton, the announcements, reinforce them in email, discussion board, but try to teach these principles early and often to help invite them to consider them, to change. I focus entirely on learning. I never talk about points. Because if I talk about points, then they'll know that it's about points. They already have enough of that. That's we know that that's their mindset. Yeah.
What kind of things do you put in there then to remind them of this? Like the things that you shared with us with the scripture.
The doctrine. Yeah, the doctrine. And I invite them, in my notes from Brother Eckton section, I have a Q&A part. So I solicit questions or ask them to think about, what do you think about this? And how does this go against maybe what you've experienced in your educational experience? Just to get them thinking about it. Because, and I tell them, I'm never going to talk about points with you unless you bring it up. I'm focused on learning, and I always say that. And they know that what I care about is the learning. The points are going to come. But again, how often do we, in our synchronous meetings, if we have a life class meeting, do we treat it as a council? And do we solicit comments from them? So here are some other things. Authenticity and vulnerability. So I'll be vulnerable with you guys a little bit. Ironically, I teach a conflict negotiation management class. I just went through a divorce. Now, that's not something that you would share normally. I'm not wearing it as a badge of courage or, hey, look at me, have sympathy on me. I'm saying this is my real life experience. And I want you to know where I'm at because I value you knowing about me and you knowing about each other as students. If we can become vulnerable, we're more willing to open our hearts to each other and our humanity, our life experience, which are the lenses through which we view the world and each other as human beings, as children of God. And so if we can be authentic and not be afraid, if we can overcome that fear, those fears that we have, that will allow us to open our hearts. So in my instructor profile, I have a screencast, and I share that with them. I share about my life experience, and I say I've learned a lot. I've made a lot of mistakes, and I've learned from them. And I continue to learn. And I even say some of you may be hesitant to learn about conflict from a professor who has had this experience. And I invite you to discover for yourself what value can be added. Okay. Focus on learning, set of points. The student voice. And here's another way that students can be willing to open up. If they know that their voice is going to be listened to, they'll continue to open their hearts. Let me give you another example. I'm working on a pilot right now, and we are making real-time changes even in the very same week sometimes based on their feedback. And as they see that we're implementing the changes, they're sharing more and more, but it's also spilled over into our class. The discussion board discussions are rich because they're opening their hearts, they're sharing some real personal stuff. So it's been important. So they need to know that we're listening, that their voice matters. We all want to know that we matter. I think a lot of times if it's only one way. Focus on and remember student details. Remembering what they say and following up with them. It could be as simple as, on Monday I had a student talk about how her mom was hospitalized. And on Wednesday I sent an email and just say, hey, how's your mom doing? And I know we all do those kinds of little things, but that contributes to this idea of opening of hearts, so that the Spirit can come in and teach. And here's something that I have found that's really, really important. Like, again, we get a lot of those superficial responses, especially on a discussion board of, yeah, I think this is important. I agree, type of things. Well, those are theoretical or testimony based, as we talked about. How can we say, okay, how do you know this? Have you had an experience in your life that has given you a further witness of why this is important for you? Or if you haven't had an experience, how might you see this working in your life moving forward in a personal way? But the more that we can get them to the heart, to the personal application, to that understanding, the better. I like to teach them the difference between questions and questioning. I think a lot of times we live in a culture that when you ask a question, a lot of times we get on the defensive because we think that you're questioning if you're asking a question. And so I tell them up front, I like to ask a lot of questions. So whenever I ask questions, I'm not questioning you. I'm asking a question to invite further thought. So I put that out there on the front end, just because, again, if we want people to open their hearts, we want to give them, shoot a warning shot across the bow to say, hey, I'm going to be asking a lot of questions. So don't think that I'm questioning you. We're just preparing their hearts so they don't put up the walls, okay? And then a lot of times we get things from students that say, I was sick, I was in the hospital, or whatever excuses that we often get. And so what I like to do is, again, in the spirit of inviting students to take ownership of their learning assessment, is I'll say, okay, you know what you've got going on in your life better than I do. I trust you. And that's another aspect of creating an open heart, is I trust you as a learner. I want you to make me a proposal of when you're going to get your last week's work in and still remain current with this week's work, so you don't miss out on discussion boards this week. You give me a proposal of when you're going to turn it in, and the consequences that if you don't turn it in by your self-imposed date, what those consequences will be. And then I just have to implement what they propose. I'm not the bad guy if they don't follow through, but they're taking ownership. And if I don't agree, then we can volley back and forth on ideas. But it invites them to take more ownership of their learning. And again, it shows, it reinforces the idea that their voice matters. And then if you have group assignments, you can have them create their own rules of engagement. And in some instances, I've had it where groups will vote people off the iron, so to speak. That's one of the options. Is if someone's not pulling their weight, they can vote someone off. And that person who is voted off, the assignment is still to be in a group. So they've still got to do it in a group. So that person who was voted off, they've got to plead their case before another group to allow them to join. And so it invites a couple things. It's like, wow, if I get voted off, someone may not want to have me. So it invites me to engage in a different way. But what you're doing is you invite your groups to create their own rules of engagement so that it's rules for success. But again, you're giving that ownership to them. You give some parameters, but those are some things to think about. And then you can also assign students to facilitate, to be leaders of discussion boards in different weeks. Let them be in charge. If they see that someone's not engaging, they could be the ones that reach out via email. to their fellow peers in their group to say, hey, you okay? Haven't seen you post yet. You know, and I like sometimes I'll model this in the first week or two of what that might look like, where I'm the facilitator, I'm in charge, and then I turn it over to them. You know, that's another way of inviting that. I've talked entirely way too much, so I want you guys to think now, based on maybe some of the thoughts that I've shared or what the Spirit has taught you, what are some things, what are some takeaways for you? What might you do differently? And I'm going to switch gears here, and I'm going to go to our little text thing. And I want you to text some of your thoughts. So these are totally anonymous. And so if any of you are watching live streaming, if any of you want to text your responses, you can do it right now, and they'll show up on the screen. Okay? So you just texted your name up there. Okay? So text in your ideas, or you can share live. What are some of your thoughts and feelings about what you might do differently as a result? What has the Spirit taught you about how to help your students take more ownership or responsibility for their life? Or what might you do differently? Yes.
Well, I plan to follow your idea there about I won't talk about points. The current past course I've been teaching, I felt like I did that a lot. Hey, you know, your assignment's due, it's worth this much, you better work on it to get it in because it's going to affect your grade. I'm teaching a pilot course now, and I can see that shifted. Everything's just worth 1 point except for the major essays. And so it's really up to them if those assignments will prepare them to do those major essays. But it won't really affect the grade whether they do or not. So it's really about the learning and preparation. And so I think I can jump on board with that by emphasizing, you know, you need to keep track of your grade. I'm not going to talk about points. These assignments are to help you learn, and always come to me. You know, with that approach, I think we'll be in line with how the course is designed too.
Awesome. Good. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. We've got Kara Allen. Okay. Any other thoughts that anyone wants to share? What might you do differently, or even in your other roles, even as a parent, as an uncle, aunt, grandparent? Any thoughts? Yes.
I'm actually thinking how, you know, I do some of these activities even in my live class, but one of the things that I usually do is it's kind of one of the first day kind of things. It doesn't happen that often that I share other things about myself or, you know, what's going on. And I feel like that might be something that I need to do more of, because then they're going to feel more of the connection with me rather than, you know, first day, put it away, never bring it back out again.
Excellent. In one of the feedback items that I got from students, they said they want me to share more of how I have struggled with these principles in my own life. And that requires us to be vulnerable. And so as I share more in my live class meetings or in the discussion boards, I'm sharing personal application, successes and failures, and it's more inviting for them to do the same. Because it's like, okay, he's willing to do it. It's like, I'm going to let my guard down. I'm not going to do it too. And I see that in my own classes. Other thoughts?
I was thinking about how you talk about the walls, right, that we come into any teaching environment that have to be broken down, and sometimes there's, I don't know, it's a question of where's the power lie, right, in terms of a student, you know, teacher's going to make all the decisions, you know, for the course and everything. And I was just thinking an example you gave of late work, right, where you move responsibility of the late work really to the student, rather than you saying, okay, have it done to me by Tuesday or whatever, you know, that it's all still on you, but you saying, you know, propose to me, you know, how you're going to make this up a little bit. And I just like, I don't know, I like more responsibility that's on them. They feel they're the owner, you're the facilitator, not you're the boss they're trying to please.
And it really builds trust. It's like, oh yeah, you trust me, my voice matters. It's not a power trip, it's not a dominion thing. Okay, good. Anything else? Any other thoughts? Thank you. Try to focus on teaching principles and let them find application. It says, be trusting and instill accountability to meet deadlines. Okay. Very good. And this is polleverywhere.com. You can create an account. It's kind of a fun little tool to use. And it's nice because if people don't want to share verbally, they can share anonymously. They can be their own introverted self and embrace it. So, yeah,
One thing
Karen?
I've been thinking with brother broadheads and yours is that I think that I want to get back to making sure the students know the learning model outcomes and principles and sharing them more in the course. And so when you were talking about how you share the doctrine to help them change their hearts, I think I want to get back to that and include that more in my feedback and say this refers to this principle of trying to dive into the scriptures, or this is a great application of this or whatnot, so that they understand what those principles are, and then they can remember that they're not just going to get a grade, that they're going to get your understanding. But I bet most of them can't ramble off those 5 principles.
Well, and the more that we're intentional in the way that we frame our course and frame learning and frame these principles and the principles that Brother Brian talked about, the more it's going to be on their mind. And as we weave it in and out and we revisit throughout the course, the more it'll be instilled, and it'll hopefully potentially change their learning experience in other classes as well. I'll just close because our time is up, but I do want to close with my testimony because we can do that here, and I love that. I know through my own experience that when we're willing to be vulnerable, when we're willing to be ourselves and not worry about what other people think, when we can be true to who we are and the gifts and talents that we've been blessed with, our students are more welcome to do the same. And I hope that as you really focus on that this is a joint responsibility, teaching and learning, it's a joint responsibility. It's a two-way street. It's not a one-way. That we can learn from each other, but the Spirit really is the teacher. And our opportunity is to create the conditions for people to open their hearts and minds so the Spirit can be the real teacher. And to share that in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.